Welcome to New Hampshire Uncharted, where we go beyond the charts and graphs to bring you the policy conversations that matter, backed by the data you trust. I'm G. Martin, your host, and each month we'll tackle a big policy question facing the Granite State, breaking it all down with experts in the latest research. New Hampshire Uncharted is a podcast from the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute, produced in partnership with the Marlin Fitzwater Center for Communication at Franklin Pierce University and the Granite State News Collaborative. Let's dive in. Food insecurity is rising in New Hampshire again. After pandemic aid briefly lowered hunger rates, food insecurity has rebounded to pre-pandemic levels, with more than 42,000 Granite State households struggling to afford enough to eat. And the effects are far-reaching, from health challenges to educational setbacks for our children. And just recently, the Fiscal Policy Institute found the problem could grow even worse. Under recently passed federal legislation under President Trump's mega bill, 4,000 Granite Staters could lose SNAP food assistance due to new work requirements and red tape, a shift that would also push more program costs onto the state of New Hampshire. Joining us to explore these challenges and solutions are three leaders working with unique perspectives in food insecurity. Laura Milliken, Executive Director of New Hampshire Hunger Solutions. Elsy Cipriani, Executive Director of the New Hampshire Food Bank. And Kyle Repucci, Principal of Broken Ground School in Concord. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sheen.
So, Laura, for the first question, let's go over to you. Let's start with the big picture. We know, based on the latest information, that more than 42,000 households are food insecure here in New Hampshire. That number has grown since the pandemic. What does food insecurity really look like across the state today, and what's been driving the increase?
Well, I think that what it looks like is families and individuals not being able to make ends meet. It's important to know that food insecurity, when we talk about food insecurity, often people think about, the feeling of hunger. While that, of course, is part of it, the definition of food insecurity is not having reliable access to a sufficient quantity of nutritious food. So we're not necessarily talking about people who have nothing in their houses to eat all the time and feel hungry all the time, but we might be talking about what one parent described to me as open-faced meals. So we only eat our sandwiches on one piece of bread to save bread. Or another parent told me that she used to wait until her children had eaten and eat the leftovers from their plates because there wasn't enough to go around. And I think that, the Fiscal Policy Institute has given us all kinds of data about how prices are rising in healthcare, in childcare, in housing, and food, and I think it's hitting people hard.
No, absolutely. I appreciate that. I was just speaking to a group of people and talking about the cost of eggs being up 16%, vegetables this summer over 40% increase, just sort of, I think it was June to July. So, we're really seeing that. Elsy, what type of demand is the food bank seeing? I think there's a particular picture in someone's mind about the individuals that you're serving, but what might surprise listeners about those who are coming to food bank in the other area agencies?
So we have seen a significant increase in demand. For example, compared to last year, this year we have seen that our agencies, which are food pantries, soup kitchens, emergency shelters across the state, that get food from the food bank, we have seen an increase of over 12% compared to last year. And a recent conversation that we had with a procurement manager, she disclosed that she is actually spending the whole food purchasing budget, which previous years she was very conservative and she was allowed to save a little bit of this budget, but this year she's spending the whole amount. So we definitely are buying more because we are distributing more. And we have less because we don't have the same funding that we had at the same time this past year. So another thing that we have is very interesting is the demand for nutritious food. As many people know, we lost part of our federal funding in the beginning of this year which was the funding that we were using to fund our New Hampshire Feeding New Hampshire program. This program was allowing us to provide our partner agencies with funding to buy nutritious food from local farmers. Without the funding, we are struggling to make sure that we continue providing the families and individuals that we serve with the food that they need to be successful in their lives and to meet their basic needs. So even though we will be okay and we will raise in the funding, we still are filling the gap from the funding that we lost.
No, and that's an important point. Just to sort of reiterate, you've seen it in an increase. I think you said 12% here. So you're seeing a 12% increase at the same time you're seeing funding decrease. And so even if, assuming the need was flat, funding decrease means you can do less. And so there's sort of more demand, yet at the same time you're sort of seeing a loss in funding. In the New Hampshire Food Bank is a nonprofit organization. So obviously, there's folks make gifts to that. But my guess is that, there's a lot more that goes, whether it's federal funding, local funding, to really be able to make this happen. Is that a fair assessment of what's happening at the food bank?
Yes, it's a very fair assessment. We're definitely trying to do more with less.
Absolutely, especially, and again, sort of a really heartbreaking time that sort of all these things are coming together. Kyle, we're about to start the school year pretty soon, and so you've spoken powerfully about the importance of school meals. What are you seeing at Broken Ground School, and what do other principals talk about when it comes up to hunger showing up in the classroom?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we see is just when students aren't accessing their curriculum, it's usually a lot of big feelings in little bodies, and the root cause a lot of times is that they're hungry. They either didn't have breakfast or they didn't have dinner, or they were too bashful to go for breakfast at school. So we do see a lot of students not accessing their curriculum for a variety of reasons, but a lot of times it's a result of hunger, and then that manifesting itself in behaviors that normally don't happen when a student is fed and happy. And I think that's what we see. We see students not being happy because they're hungry.
Absolutely. And, having a 3 and a 6-year-old, I know about those big feelings, small body. And, it's one of those things you're like, oh, my daughter Addie, like, what's going on? Oh, are you hungry? Like, so, I think about when you're at school, again, that's really a key, portion to success, as you sort of highlight. Just to follow up on that, nearly 1 in 4 students are eligible for free and reduced price meals. And so I'm wondering, what does that do to, as folks, their ability to learn? But is there a stigma to that? I know that there's challenges to sort of get folks to sign up. Obviously, here in New Hampshire, that is important because it affects school funding or funding formula. But, are you seeing that there's stigma or sort of policy gaps that sort of make it harder for families to sign up? Like, what are some of the barriers that maybe the school does to try to sign folks up? And again, after Kyle answers this, would love to hear from Laura to chime in on that as well.
Sure, Gene. So we do our very best at the beginning of the year, because many people don't realize that we have until October 1st to really get that in, so that finances for the following year are affected at the state level. And a lot of barriers come down to whether it's parent pride. Sometimes we do have families that are illiterate, so they can't access the form and don't know what information to provide. Fortunately, here in Concord, we do have home to school liaisons that work very hard to contact families and set up appointments. But oftentimes those families are working 2 jobs and aren't accessible when our home to school liaisons are working. So it is an uphill battle to get those forms filled out. And I wish something could be done to make that a little easier, because it is a yearly requirement. And just because someone was free and reduced last year doesn't mean they automatically are, even though their circumstances could have changed or even gotten worse financially.
No, thank you for that. Kyle, thanks for that, Kyle. Laura, would love to bring you into the conversation and sort of see what
Thank
you
you.
could add to that.
Yeah, I mean, we know that statewide that we're only feeding breakfast to 47% of the kids who are eating free and reduced meals. So that's like 14,000 kids in the state who could be eating free or reduced breakfast who aren't eating it. And that's chiefly because of the way that schools offer breakfast. It's often early in the morning before the buses can get there, and it becomes known as, free kids breakfast or poor kids breakfast. And once kids feel that stigma, they're not going to participate, even if they're hungry in the morning. But schools like Kyle's are doing breakfast a different way, so that all kids can participate.
Yeah,
which is the best practice, and the outcomes of breakfast are just many. The kids do better in school, they do better behaviorally, and they do better in the long term. There are lots of longitudinal studies that show that health and academics are better in the long term.
Thanks so much, Laura. Kyle, you want to share how you're doing? Laura mentioned you're doing it differently. Would love to hear about that.
Yeah, we do have the traditional breakfast that happens first thing in the morning, but we do have something called Second Chance Breakfast, which is a second breakfast, which is a little different than the first offering, and it happens around snack time. So one of the things that schools, not just mine, have really had to institute is adding snacks to the day. Kids are not accessing all of their 3 meals regularly, so we find ways to feed them. That's often through donations, partnerships. So it is another stressor for schools. But the Second Chance Breakfast that happens between 9 and 10 o'clock gives students another opportunity to, while kids are having snack, to either have a snack or to get that breakfast so that they can fill up and then access their curriculum.
Can I jump in again?
Of course, go ahead.
Just to say, it really makes a difference if all the kids are participating in breakfast. The stigma is far less there, and nobody knows when they swipe their card whose parents are paying or not. So that really makes breakfast part of the school day, and makes sure that kids are fed.
And that is happening in other states. I think Pennsylvania is one. There are other folks that are sort of moving to that option. And so, Laura, just interested to sort of hear, because I know this is true with other federal state partnerships, but New Hampshire, generally speaking, we underutilize sort of the benefits that folks are eligible for. Just thinking about, we've talked so much already about children, but just sort of thinking about older adults, that still are not enrolling in these programs. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what needs to change to sort of help increase that utilization?
Thank you. I think that to zoom out a little bit, it's not just older adults, but really all of our federal nutrition programs were under-enrolled. We like to think of our system of food and nutrition supports like a power grid that moves healthy food through communities and schools to households. But in New Hampshire, the grid is well developed in some areas and patchy or non-existent in others. So we think we could end hunger, or pretty close to ending hunger, if everyone eligible for federal nutrition programs. And there we're talking about SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which was sometimes known as food stamps. We talked about school meals. There are summer meal programs. There's WIC, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Program for women, infants, and children. And there are a couple of others as well. But if everybody was connected to those programs, then we could be sure that they were at least getting some nutritional support. So in New Hampshire, we're 46th in the nation in school breakfast participation, and we already talked about why that is. We're 39th in the nation in SNAP, and we estimate that only about 32% of people who are eligible for SNAP are participating, and WIC serves just over half those eligible. And, each of those programs has different reasons for why people don't participate, but, stigma is certainly among them. But I think there are ways that we could reduce the barriers to programs. We can certainly get the word out. That's not expensive. Information is not expensive. So I think we could do better at getting the word out. And to your point about older adults, older adults typically get some level of Social Security income, which makes them relative to other SNAP recipients at a slightly higher income level, even though they're still living in poverty. And so they might just get the minimal SNAP benefit, which is $23. And SNAP is complicated, and you have to hand over a lot of personal information, and a lot of older adults feel like it's not worth it. The good news is that we've just recently in New Hampshire instituted a program called the Elderly Simplified Application Project, which unfortunately is badly named because it doesn't really have anything to do with the application. But it means that older adults and people with disabilities with fixed incomes will only have to recertify for the program every 3 years unless their income changes. So that means that, yes, you still have to hand over the information, but you don't have to do it again for 3 years. And even at the 3-year point, the state has made it very easy. They send a pre-populated form to the recipient, and the recipient just has to send it back. So really, you go through it once, and if your income doesn't change, you can stay on the program, because there are plenty of older adults who need that $23.
Oh, absolutely. And I appreciate that sort of level of customer service focus, because I think, in 2025, we live in a space where I think people are so used to things being relatively easy and straightforward when things are renewed. And so I just think the use of technology or anything you could do to sort of streamline a process is really important. You talked about the amount of sort of the minimum benefit for folks. Could you talk a little bit about sort of the SNAP benefits and what they sort of, quote, max out as? Because I think there's this narrative that, folks are getting thousands of dollars in benefit, right? And sort of, if you go to the store and you have a family of 4, maybe you could be spending, $200, dollars at, your Hannaford, your market basket. But I know that this maxes out at a meal around, I believe, $284 per meal. That was sort of last year. And so that's just not enough to live in any county to sort of pay for that. So can you talk a little bit about the mismatch that with families and sort of help to do some myth busting about, this is a relatively small amount of dollars for most folks?
Yeah, SNAP is, in 2024, SNAP participants in New Hampshire received an average of $167 per month, which is $5.49 per person per day. Imagine if you had to live on $5.49 a day. I think that would be really difficult. And as you alluded to, Jean, that's only about a third of a modestly priced meal in New Hampshire. The per meal cost is a third of the modestly priced meal in New Hampshire, which means that people run out of SNAP benefits, usually mid-month or in the third week of the month, and need to look to other ways of keeping their families fed.
Absolutely. And just, that $167, when I think about that, again, young kids, we love berries and vegetables, and not so much vegetables for all the kids, but we try to push them as good parents should. But, it's expensive. Bananas or, all these sort of things. So when we think about that in totality, my guess is, and folks are probably spending that in a week. So I think that is a good sort of framework for folks that folks are not getting thousands of dollars, a month in sort of free food. And it's really, a meager thing, the fact that folks are running out of that. So I really appreciate that context. We try to always sort of provide that reality-based data for folks. Elsy, I know as we think about hunger and impacting folks in our state, how is the food access harder in rural areas? I live in Manchester, so it's sort of a little bit easier to go through things, but I'm thinking about other parts of the state and sort of what are some of the geographic gaps in our food system, and how does it make it more challenging for folks who live in rural communities to get the access to food that they need?
So the New Hampshire Food Bank is currently conducting a listening tour across all counties, and we are having the opportunity to meet in person with some of our partner agencies, as I mentioned before, food pantries, soup kitchens, emergency shelters. I'm mentioning this because this has been a great opportunity to confirm some of those challenges that you just mentioned, particularly when we had our listening sessions in the North Country, Coast County, Grafton, Carroll County. We did confirm that these communities are facing big challenges, even though we are trying, and we have tried during the last couple of years from the New Hampshire Food Bank to facilitate the access to nutritious food, the distance to grocery stores. Most of these communities don't have access to the regular or the big grocery stores that we have access in the bigger cities. They have to rely on convenience stores that very often don't offer a lot of nutritious food. The lack of public transportation, right? There is not a lot of transportation in these towns, many of these towns in the North Country, and a lot of families don't even have their own transportation, and they have to rely on a neighbor or a friend to go and get food. There are fewer retail options, as I mentioned, so there are very few. We try to work with retail partners across the state, but the options that people have in the North Country are very limited. And also, there are not that many food pantries in the North Country, or soup kitchens, programs that can offer food assistance to individuals. And I do want to follow up on something that Laura mentioned in terms of the stigma, because I do think that one of the main reasons we have a big challenge, not just in the North Country, but in every community that we serve in the state, is that people are afraid to ask for help. And it's a misconception that people are abusing the system, of that they are getting too much food, or they are getting all the opposite. People have this myth that there is always someone that needs more, that somebody that is in a bigger need. And there is we have confirmed, because we have a SNAP outreach program, and this staff member, when she goes out to the community, some of the things that she hears is that people are now afraid to apply for a SNAP because they think that it's going to go away. So basically it's going to be a waste of their time to apply for a SNAP, because there is so much misinformation about these benefits. So definitely the stigma is affecting the lack of awareness. And the New Hampshire Food Bank, is the only organization in the state that is providing a statewide outreach and application assistance for the SNAP. And we only have 2 staff members to do that. So it's kind of unrealistic. We do our best, but I think the lack of a capacity to be able to do a wider job is definitely affecting the number of people that are aware of a SNAP, are aware of the eligibility, and are able to apply.
No, I appreciate that. And again, just to highlight, I think for folks who listen to the show or sort of follow NHFPI, this is something that we try to highlight often. What you said is, the food bank, a nonprofit organization, has the SNAP outreach folks. And so you are doing the work that I think your average person probably would think that someone in state government would be doing. But again, sort of just to highlight, this is work that nonprofits are doing to be able to support our communities. And I think that's really an important point that you lifted up. And then, with the stigma, again, I lived in a homeless shelter as a kid for a few years, and you just never know what happens in anyone's life. Everyone, you have everything's great until something happens. And so we should never be sort of afraid to sort of ask for help when we need it, because we never know, one day we could be in that place. So thanks for all that you're doing there. Laura, I'm wondering what concerns you have about this new federal bill, with what's going to happen, and then what the next step is in the next few years as the state grapples with having to pay the cost for SNAP, and what that could mean with sort of the quote error rate and all of these things that could add added uncertainty to something that we're already hearing. Funds are being sort of pulled back. We have more need, yet in a few years we could see even less resources coming to New Hampshire.
The federal reconciliation bill that passed at the beginning of January significantly weakened the SNAP program. SNAP is really the first line of defense against hunger for the country and has been for the last 65 years. The bill really, really attempted to gut the program. So the most immediate effects are that legal immigrants, folks who have humanitarian protections, who are refugees or fleeing domestic violence, will immediately lose SNAP eligibility. And that really abandons our long-term commitment to helping folks. And that also means that aid is cut for their citizen children. In addition, there were already pretty harsh work requirements on SNAP. It used to be from folks from 18 to 55 were subject to them, and now it's 18 to 65. And they removed the exemptions from the work requirements for veterans, for unhoused people, and for former foster youth. And they also added families with children over 14. So, and when we think about work requirements, people think, oh, well, people should be working. But really, if you look at the numbers, most of the people who are on SNAP are already working. And if they're not working, it's because they are disabled in some way and unable to work, or because they are caregivers for their older adult parents or for their children. And additionally, there are studies from other states that show that work requirements don't actually encourage work. They just create a ton of red tape that makes it really difficult for people to stay on the program. And you can just imagine, somebody who's living with a low income, who is maybe piecing together 3 part-time jobs. Now it becomes an additional part-time job to report to the SNAP program. So I'm extremely concerned about that. So and down the line, there are cost shifts from Congress to states. So on October 1st of 2026, New Hampshire will be required to pick up 75% of the cost of running the program. It used to be that the federal government and the state government each paid 50%. And that additional cost will have to be appropriated in New Hampshire. And it's, minimally $5.75 million based on current administrative costs. That's without implementing all of the new changes. So that means that if we want to run the program in New Hampshire, we're going to have to come up with those dollars. And we'll certainly be advocating for that because we think it's really important, not just for hungry people, but for the public health of our state, and also because a SNAP brings federal dollars into the states that legitimately stimulate the economy. So, it's a loss overall to all of us in New Hampshire if the SNAP program doesn't exist, and so we need to protect it. The other cost shifts will be implemented the following year in 2027, and it used to be that 100% of the benefits for food were paid for by the federal government, and now, depending on states' error rates, and error rates are underpayments or overpayments based on no fault of either the state or the person. We're not talking about fraud here. There's very little fraud in the SNAP program, but sometimes mistakes are made and people are underpaid or overpaid. The underpayment rate in New Hampshire is higher than the overpayment rate. And so based on our current error rate, we'd have to pay 5% of the administrative costs. Congress has created a scale based on error rates that goes up to 15%. So for New Hampshire, based on current SNAP participation, At 5%, that would be $8 million additional dollars, and at 15% would be $23 million additional dollars. So again, we hope to that we can work with bipartisan legislators in the state to protect as much of the SNAP program as possible.
No, I appreciate that. And just to sort of hone in on that point, because you're right, when people think error rate, they think that something's wrong. But the fact that if the benefit that is paid out to folks is less than what they're eligible for, that error rate, which you noted was higher than the opposite of that, that folks, the state of New Hampshire would have to pay more because of that. So that's a really important point to sort of note as we think about that. For the last question, we've been sort of ending our podcast with sort of kind of what gives you hope. What's one solution or success story that gives you hope and shows what's possible as we sort of try to address food insecurity here in New Hampshire? Because we try to remind folks that we can solve problems through public policy. So, let's start maybe with Kyle, and let's go with Elise, and then we get in with Laura.
Oh, gosh. Well, I'm hopeful just for the general well-being of people and the kindness of others, because I'm fortunate to see every other Friday through local community connections, our teachers actually go out into the community and provide a mobile food bank for students and families in our catchment area that need additional food on the weekends. And that's an entirely volunteer group that works outside school hours to maintain a pantry of items in conjunction with the food bank, and people that volunteer to drive to Manchester to get the food. And so I'm very hopeful that people do care. Gene, I do have a question for you just related to this. From a policy standpoint, I don't know if your organization or other organizations have looked into the amount of school debt that local communities acquire each year, and if there could be some analysis between the town welfare offices and people that are eligible that don't take advantage, and then show the communities and show the state what could be funded that isn't being funded, but then it gets passed off to the local taxpayer, because every year I'm sure communities are feeling that burden more and more as the need goes up and up.
I'm sorry, Laura, did you want me to answer that, or do you? Because I know you do some work on
it. You're welcome to answer it. Okay. I'll just say that we are hearing from schools across the state that they have incredibly high school meal debt. The city of Concord, over $100,000 last year. The city of Manchester, similar, more than that. Based on size of school, you can imagine it's similar across the state.
Absolutely. And the one thing that I think, folks should think about is when things, we have a state law here in New Hampshire that the local communities or towns sort of, and everyone has sort of a human service office or, so-called welfare office, but the towns are responsible to help those in need. And so what we see is that when there are cuts at the federal level, cuts at the state level, we see, towns, and there have been sort of noted, and this is separate from the meal debt, that folks go to their local communities when they're in need of assistance. And so again, those costs, if there's not investments sort of upstream, those are affected. And so again, I think that's a good point to sort of highlight that these costs are being borne by someone, and in this case, right, it's going to be local property taxpayers. If folks don't have what they need, they're going to their local community. So thanks so much for that. And we'll go to Elsy. So, what's sort of giving you hope, and what's one solution or success story that you are thinking about?
So I think one of the things that I have seen because of the environment that we currently experiencing is definitely I am seeing more collaboration and more partnerships among nonprofit organizations, and overall communities are partnering and are seeing how we can fill the gap, how we can do this together better. Because we work on helping people to get food, we work in the food insecurity field, but this is just part of the puzzle. We are part of a bigger picture, which is helping vulnerable individuals and families to come out of poverty. So food is just part of the puzzle. We need to collaborate. We need to get partnerships that help us with the big picture, which is providing affordable housing, getting people access to quality healthcare. So seeing that people are more open to collaborate, that really gives me hope. And another part of this that I see as a big need is more concrete, is data. Right now we relied on food insecurity numbers that are provided by Feeding America. And these numbers are usually a little behind, 2 years behind. And what they provide is food insecurity data by county, and is divided by adults and children. But to be able to map the meal gap in New Hampshire, it will be great to have more specific data in terms of food insecurity by zip code, by county. That for us, as the one helping with the network and partnering with local food pantries and food agencies, it will be really helpful to see what are the zip codes with the higher need. So something more granular that allow us to better map the meal gap.
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate that. We always are looking for more granular data by zip code, and that's certainly a challenge that we have in New Hampshire with so many things, given the size of the state. Laura, do you want to end us off on your item?
Sure. Yeah. I also am inspired by communities working together. We help to coordinate a bunch of food access coalitions across the state. And those are community partners who come together to address hunger at the local level, and we work with them to identify, policy barriers to help to overcome that, to help people be less food insecure. And we really, there are a number of coalitions across the state. You can see them on our website, and all of the people on this podcast are involved in that in those coalitions in various ways, and I think that we can work together to make sure that people's voices are heard, and that we can make the change that we need to get people fed. We have relatively lower poverty in New Hampshire, and sometimes that means that people aren't paying attention to poverty. But what it also means is that it's not that hard to end poverty in New Hampshire. There really are solutions, and more than happy to talk to anybody who wants to talk about that, because I'd like to see it happen.
Absolutely. I think that's something that we can all agree on, that we'd love to see that happen. Well, thank you all for being with us today. And I think this conversation makes it clear that food insecurity is a growing issue here in New Hampshire, with consequences that extend far beyond the dinner table. And whether it's from school lunch lines to grocery store access, the way that we respond today and in the coming months and weeks will really shape the well-being of our communities across the state. So thanks so much for a great conversation with different perspectives.
Thank you, Gene.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of New Hampshire Uncharted. If you found today's conversation helpful, be sure to subscribe and join us again next time for another thoughtful policy conversation. This podcast is produced by the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute in partnership with the Marlin Fitzwater Center for Communication at Franklin Pierce University and the Granite State News Collaborative. A big thank you to our partners without whom this would not be possible. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on New Hampshire Uncharted.